Welcome to Night Talk.
Hey, that time worked for me, so there you go. But we had a fail safe in place. I let John announce it. But yes, welcome to Night Talk. Um, I'm Jim here with my friend John Scoleri, and we're going to talk about Night of the Living Dead and all things related. In this case, we want to discuss films that came before Night of the Living Dead that were the predecessors of this kind of style of filmmaking, and then what their similarities are, and then what the difference is, how George Romero and company took their film in a bit of a different direction. So, well, John, why don't you start off with the film that we're talking about tonight?
The Killer Shrews from 1959, so almost 10 years prior to Night of the Living Dead, um, but famous as a classic kind of siege horror film. Um, Often maligned, but uh, I think for those of us that appreciate a good monster movie, this one has some stuff going for it. Um, and that for those that grew up in a certain era will recognize the main star, James Best from Dukes of Hazzard, um, where he played Roscoe, um, and that comes across in his performance in The Killer Shrews. Um, but as we talk about these films, we're not saying specifically that these were hard and fast influences, but they do share common traits. And in the case of The Killer Shrews, we know that this aired on Chiller Theater in, was it 1965? It was like a Halloween. Um,
1964, I believe it was. We were able to yes, track it down as the second um, feature. At that time, Chiller Theater was doing two features a night on Saturday night late, and the Killer Shrews played as the second feature, um, which I am looking up. But if I don't get the exact date, that's okay. If you remember, anybody watching or who has steadfastly watched Night Talk, if you remember, we did talk about the Killer Shrews briefly when about 2 years ago we discussed the origins of Night of the Living Dead. Um, the actual origins of Night of the Living Dead, which come from a combination of pop culture and social norms, and thereby breaking them. Um, More so than Night of the Living Dead comes from any kind of voodoo background or anything like that, which seems to be the thing that people love to try to pin on the film. Um, the whole purpose of diving deep into these specific films is, well, one, we can have a much shorter night talk. It's a little bit easier for everybody to digest, and so we're not just going on for hours and hours. And uh, and then two, you're getting more into the details, and just painting a better picture of what independent filmmaking was about, and why people went into it for the money or whatever, the glory or whatever other reason. And you can see from this title screen, it's very Universal monsters era, which had already been a good 20 plus years, 25 years out of vogue at that point. um, and it has the Hollywood Pictures Corporation credit there, which this movie was actually not made in Hollywood. It was made in Texas, by a producer, Gordon McClendon, who actually stars in this particular film. He's one of the characters. But McClendon, uh, besides having his making his fortune in real estate and radio and various other other things. I think some motion picture exhibition. He wanted to make films, and his start was making two independent science fiction monster movies. This one, The Killer Shrews, and the one before it, The Giant Gila Monster. So he absolutely understood the exploitation side of things, and having a great title and something that he could put out there, and the teenagers would want to watch.
Larry just asked a good question in the comments. He said, "What if we've never seen the Killer Shrews?" Asking for a friend.
That's a that's actually a great question.
Yeah.
Well, tell them why we got on this Killer Shrews kick and why it got us going.
Well, so I think it's fair to say that spoilers may come up in our discussion, but I think nothing that's going to prevent your enjoyment from the film. But there is a new Blu-ray release of The Giant Gila Monster and The Killer Shrews that was just released, and it's actually the best this film has ever looked. So if you've not seen it, um,
I'm just whiting
you
myself
disappear.
right out there. That's not going to
Um,
work.
yeah, if you've not seen The Killer Shrews, now is kind of a great entry point to do that. There's a little prologue at the beginning of the film that's been missing on 90% of the VHS and DVD releases of it for years, but it's never looked this good, and it's I would say it's definitely worth checking out. If you're a fan of Night of the Living Dead, there are aspects of it that I think you can appreciate even more. Some of the things we'll talk about tonight, but
I don't think you're going to come across any kind of real spoilers. I mean, everybody has seen these films or something like that, and they
yeah,
follow a very similar formula. And as we go through different films over the course of several of these night talks, you're going to see the same formula, and that's the idea, is to show the contrast between besides the similarities, the contrast between Night of the Living Dead and its predecessor films.
yeah,
I think that's you're getting like way ahead, or really just jumping ahead to the conclusion. I don't really think we see the influences very the influences that George Romero took in as a film aficionado first, before he started directing and editing and piecing film together himself to make feature films. We don't really see his influences very solidly in the final product, and I think that goes for any of his films. They're uniquely George Romero, and they always seem to be that way. And unlike some other well-known films, you really can't place, well, he got this from here or he got this from there. So that's just a great it's just a great way that he made films. I mean, he was definitely taking things from other inspirations, but he was making them his own. So the anyway, the it's on the Film Masters label. They seem to be a new company, and that's both films, Giant Gila Monster and The Killer Shrews. They've had the same uh, public domain release issues that Night of the Living Dead had, and the good thing is, it seems that this recent restoration of both films will probably be the end all and be all, and just put all of those other public domain versions to rest.
yep,
So it's worth picking it up,
absolutely.
and you get
Yep.
both of McClendon's first foray into science fiction exploitation. You get them both on in one set, one package. So it's worth it.
Absolutely.
So jumping right ahead, let's discuss the similarities between the Killer Shrews and Night of the Living Dead. Again, a Killer Shrews coming almost 10 years prior. We can place that George and company would have had access to it through something like Chiller Theater. It was on Chiller Theater a couple of years before. They would have begun production with the idea of producing their own feature film. So this would have been one of the films that they potentially took in, and just kind of added to the mental catalog of what everybody else was doing and how they were making money. And again, this is an independent film. I think most of the stuff on that would have showed up on Chiller Theater would have been these low budget independent science fiction or horror films. At that point, most of the studios wouldn't really touch horror and science fiction too much. I mean, Universal was probably the big one that did most of the monster movies of the 30s and the 40s, and then the science fiction. They had that science fiction run in the 50s with like The Creature from the Black Lagoon and This Island Earth and great films like that.
Yeah.
But that kind of stuff, I don't know. I don't remember seeing too much of that on shows like Chiller Theater, right? There really wasn't a lot
Yeah.
of the Universal monster flicks as much.
No, those were kind of special. It was the
Yeah,
next tier down was our kind of creature features fodder growing up.
right. So you have the same idea as the latent image guys, that want to get into they're working in film in a commercial way, and they want to get into making feature films. And the way in the door is to have some kind of science fiction-y, horror monster, um, very exploitable title motion picture. And something like the Killer Shrews, of which there was many examples that just showed that group of people could get together and potentially make a film. And that's exactly what George Romero and company did in their way. So with the Killer Shrews, I mean, you could pretty much call this. It could have been titled Night of the Killer Shrews because it basically takes place in the same kind of time frame, and we're looking at the first shot in the film that is basically the background of the titles. And for a low budget film, I mean, this film is actually very well photographed, and a lot of like moody stuff like this. And the restored version on this Film Masters release really brings this out. And just really good environment, establishing the environment. They're on an island. This is a key piece of making this kind of like horror film or suspense science fiction or suspense horror film with a science fiction premise. Something going wrong with the science, and you have to isolate your characters so that these whatever the problem is, whatever the antagonist that's trying to kill everybody, it makes it very difficult for the main characters to get away. So in the case of this film, it's on an island, and here's the main characters on a coming onto a small dock. Their main boat is which can't come into the shore, is just sitting out there in the Gulf. So that's kind of like it establishes there's the salvation. If you can make it out to the boat, you will be safe.
And there's also a hurricane coming in, so
Yeah,
they
so this movie, yeah, this movie plays up all the tropes. You have everybody isolated. They can't just easily get to the boat, and Well, the boat's not an option. It's not an option just to turn right around and get onto the boat and drive off, because a hurricane is coming. So these characters are going to have to make do for one night. And there's also a trope with uh, an overall trope with the monsters. In this case, giant shrews that are about the size of wolves. Um, that at night you're in trouble. So at night you have to stay inside, but during the day they probably won't come out. So because they're not hungry enough yet. When they get really desperate, then everybody has to evade. Has to just basically leave or hunker down somewhere that you're safe. So there's also that kind of the night is dangerous motif that happens in a lot of films, and that you don't, in Night of the Living Dead, it's that you don't see things as clearly in the shadows of night as you do in the daylight. Um, a lot of the terror is removed from the situation once day comes and the posse comes rolling in.
Yeah.
But
And
little
so
do you
this is,
know that was not the case, right?
in 59, this is 4 years after I Am Legend was published. But again, that whole
Right.
notion of, the threat comes out at night. During the
Comes
day,
out.
you can kind of prepare and get ready. But once night falls, you basically have to retreat into the house and board up the walls and hope for the best. And they certainly play on that
You're right.
in this.
I Am Legend's the perfect example. Of that's the element of the vampire that the antagonists kind of adopt, and you're okay during the day, and and you have to be ready to hunker down. There's always that suspense building once you establish that to the audience, and the same thing happens in this film. It's established that you can be outside during the day, and they're probably not going to come around looking for food and attack you. But once night comes, that's their nocturnal predators. So um, another similarity is this movie has 7 characters, um, who all have to you're introduced to 7 characters, and they're the ones that basically have to try to weather this problem of being stuck on this island with these ravenous animals. Um, and it's 6 Caucasian characters and 1 African American. And that's about where the similarities end, because this cast of characters is pretty is pretty, what should we say, diverse, but in a very strange way. So we have on the right side is the hero James Best, and what's his character's name, John?
Thorn.
Right, and he's kind of the if whereas Night of the Living Dead has pretty much all the characters are everyday people. Um, Best as the ship's or the boat captain and his first mate here, Rook. Um, they're kind of the everyday blue collar guys, and who come into this situation unknowingly. And then we have the in the center, the main scientist. What's his name? I'm bad with the character names.
Yeah, the ones that stand out are Jerry, who's
To the left of him, who's kind of the was he the disgruntled alcoholic, um, lab assistant or scientific assistant or something. You don't get the sense that he's the main guy in there, in charge there, but he's in there for something, and a good a good reason that he's in there is for the love interest, which is all the way to the right. That's the chief scientist's daughter, and
And
Anne, and the main scientist. He's trying to get her out of this predicament, knowing that it's not a good situation. That much is kept from the audience.
then
And
the other
the other
doctor
gentleman between
is
them, that is Gordon McClendon himself. And
Dr.
he plays,
Radford Baines.
yeah, and he plays a pretty quirky character who has a great death scene, which we'll talk about later. The gentleman in the center, who I'm referring to as the main scientist, the one who's spearheading all of this, his character name is Dr. Craig. So here's our cast of characters, but again, the main difference is that even Anne is a scientist. What is her specialty is zoology, correct?
Yes.
So everybody here is somewhat of an authority, except for James Best and his first mate, Thorne and Rook. And the other bizarre thing is that there is such a mix of accents among all of these characters, including the seventh one, which we haven't gotten to, but let me see if we can find a pic of him. Well, let's jumped ahead a little bit. Here he is with James Best, or
That's
Thorne, investigating something. His name is Mario, and he's kind of the caretaker, maintenance guy that they have along. You don't get. He's not a doctor, correct? He's not one of the.
No. He's the one. Every time that somebody wants an alcoholic drink, they ask Mario to fix
Yeah,
it.
that's there's another big difference. We're told that alcohol or drunk alcoholism / drunkenness caused this problem of letting the shrews loose in the first place. And what does everybody do? They sit around mixing more drinks. So, in fact, that's what puts Thorne, the everyday boat captain, who's just trying to outrun a hurricane or a bad storm. That's what puts him in harm's way here, is that he hangs around for a drink, for a cocktail. So what science couldn't cure, the alcohol, I guess, takes the edge off. So, but that's our fun cast of characters. And what is also unique about this group, besides the fact that you have two normal guys, like everyday people that the audience can relate to, and they're kind of being kept out. You get the sense that everybody else knows something is not going well, and they're kept out of all that as the story starts to unfold, and the audience is along with them. We're also kept in the dark about it. But besides these two guys having very southern, varying degrees of southern accents, this group here is really a mishmash. Anne has Swedish accent, and she's constantly saying phrases in Swedish, which I would have never picked up before, except watching the new Blu-ray with the closed captions on, and they don't even bother to translate the Swedish. It says, she's speaking in Swedish. They basically just let you know that. And Dr. Craig is also supposed to be Swedish, but he has a very strong Jewish accent. So, because the actor was actually a well-known Jewish actor. And Jerry, who's played by he actually had a pretty Ken Curtis. He had a pretty diverse career. He's playing the kind of like tough yet cowardly. He would be the example of like the Harry Cooper in this situation. He's not exactly like it, but um, he's the one that's keeping everybody from basically getting along and
Yeah.
cooperating with each other, and working together to get out of this dire situation as it starts developing. Um, and he's the with the introduction of Thorne, James Best's character, he's creating this love triangle between those two and the only eligible bachelorette on the island. And of course, she takes a liking to Thorne as soon as he arrives. So,
Given the fact that Jerry was her other option, it
yes,
we certainly understand why as an audience. They get some good
so
bickering.
yeah, example of the bickering back and forth. So that's our cast of characters. Mario doesn't do much other than you know basically and there's the Spanish accent. You
Yes,
basically have all of Europe covered in there. Uh,
I was going to say as a kind of a formulaic horror film, if you do your guessing on who dies in what order, you probably won't be surprised with this film.
right, exactly. So uh, it hits all the typical. It's just weird to have one of these films where there's this diverse of a cast of characters, because the usual formula is that almost all of them are authority figures in some way, whether it's military or science or doctors or something. Even when they're playing, even when the main characters are normal people. Something like the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It's the main character's a doctor, and he's dealing with it from kind of like the community physician who knows everybody and knows their children, and delivered most of the family's children. um, he starts to see it all crumble from that perspective. um, but typically there would be one character thrown in, um, with from some other culture other than very white bread American. um, Something like the original Creature from the Black Lagoon, the captain of the boat. What's his name? Famous character actor. But he basically plays the kind of the very rough and tumble but lovable Hispanic boat captain, and who actually comes in at the end and saves the day. And actually shoots the creature along with one of his crewmates. So you typically only had one. That's all that they would. That was as much diversity as you got back in
Yeah.
the mid to late 50s with any of these things. So to have so many characters and in speaking all kinds of dialects is pretty funny, and unusual. But they are scientists, and that's where it breaks the mold of or where Night of the Living Dead breaks the mold. There's where the biggest trajectory of difference is that Night
Yeah.
of the Living Dead is all ordinary characters that the audience can see a little bit of themselves in just about everybody there. So uh, the next thing, that's our characters, and then the next thing is the environment that this sets. Um, and Again, we're dealing with a everybody taking refuge in a house, and it does have a basement, and
And there's a threat in the cellar.
yeah, so you're basically set up to have uh, any of those. You can't go outside. The first guy that is outside gets it, which is Rook. He decides to stay with the ship. If they had imparted a little bit more information to him that there's something dangerous out there, maybe he would have not stayed with the ship and come in with everybody else. But um, he's off, and then we have an incident in the cellar where Mario gets killed, and now um, the use of the house as this. I think we have an outside shot. Yes. So it's basically this one-story house with a basement and this kind of fenced-in area, and that all becomes established as it's probably, I don't know. Would you say like maybe 100 yards or so from the beach, maybe for a little further.
Maybe a little bit further, um, but that high fence, you get the sense that it's there for a reason before you know what it is. It's kind of like the
Right.
King Kong wall of. It's like what are they trying to keep out?
Right. So you get like this, and there's you could see the radio antenna, but that's been knocked out, so they can't call for help. There's all, they go through all of those typical things, and this is what you see basically before the storm is coming. So, we kind of, as the audience, we get the characters' bearings through Thorn, learning all of this. And this is what we're basically working with, is the uh, house, single-story house with this fenced-in area situated probably about 100 or 200 yards away, like through a forest from the water and the boat and salvation. And so can we last through the night? Can these characters last and us last with them? And so these are kind of like the safety zones that they're designating, and that's what creates the suspense. Whenever there's a scene and somebody steps outside, even in broad daylight, the tension starts to build because, well, what's going to happen? They're vulnerable until they get behind this fence, or until they get behind that closed door. Immediately that starts to fall apart because the Killer Shrews is not as well put together as Night of the Living Dead, which makes really good use of those various, the setting and the characters, and then how it's lit and the editing. You can see here we have some really nice photography. Well, that's the dead shrew. We'll get to that in a second. Um, some pretty nice moody photography. It looks so much better now that we could see it, a cleaned up version, instead of like the crappy public domain prints that have been circulating. But what they do with it, doesn't really add up. So, case in point, this scene in the cellar doesn't really make use of the thing in the cellar, that drive-in movie trope very well. At one point, one of the shrews gets into the house early on, and instead of attacking, the very first thing it does is it kind of runs and hides in the cellar. And I don't know if that, as I was saying to John before we got on, I don't know if that was supposed to be like the typical Hitchcock kind of deal. The audience knows it's there, but the characters don't. So you can really play with you could really ratchet up the suspense by having the characters go down into the cellar, not knowing that there's a thing waiting for them. But it just doesn't really play out.
They establish too quickly that the characters know, hey, there's a shrew in the cellar, so let's go take care of it.
Right.
It basically deflates that whole all the tension goes away because you're like, well, now they're looking for it.
Right. Uh, and and Mario is the first guy to be taken out, or the second guy, the first one inside the house to be taken out. So we're starting to lose um, the group of seven in their order of importance or least importance
Yes.
to the how things are going. You have to keep the love triangle there because if you don't have Jerry, then you don't have your
That tension.
human your human antagonist, to keep things to keep everybody on their toes. But getting to the actual shrews, so the other point to these films, and this includes Night of the Living Dead, is more so than horror movies. I mean, the setting is like a horror movie, and the lighting and all this is a horror movie. But at its base, these are science fiction films. They're about science going awry, and how the characters deal with it. They're supposed to be put in these impossible situations. And Night of the Living Dead is the same thing. A satellite coming back from exploring Venus, and it uh, is carrying a mysterious radiation. And instead of letting it land, NASA, in their wisdom, blows it up in the atmosphere, spreading the radiation everywhere. And there's your premise for the dead coming back to life. Where the Killer Shrews premise fails is they get very complicated with the entire thing. And the point is that they're um, experimenting on these small animals. I think the reason given is because they have very high energy. So
Cannibalism.
yeah, something that small. If they could kind of compact people down to a smaller size, then the food resources, and overpopulation won't become a problem. And how they get giant shrews out of that is anybody's guess. But again, it gets the whole premise is that this small animal, which at one point they're handling one. It's
Like little mice.
yeah, just like a little mouse-sized, rodent, in it, and it looks cute enough. This whole movie is based on the premise that these animals need to eat, or is it something like 2 or 3 times their body weight in order to not starve, because they're at that size, they're expending so much energy. And okay, that's interesting enough, but how we get to giant shrews where it just gets out of control is they just got a little too complicated with the premise. There probably was an easier way to get us there, and so the shrews themselves are played by several dogs, which it's amazing that they found any dogs that would put up with this, but are basically wearing these rodent masks with the really nasty looking fangs, and uh, kind of like coats of ragged hair, like very undog like hair, and kind of rodent scrawny tails. And I think I counted. There's scenes with maybe 4 of these things. I
Yeah,
mean, you're told that there's a lot more, but um,
or in any given shot at any point in time.
yeah, the most we see is 4. So this is the resources that they're working with. Just as Night of the Living Dead had X amount of extras to play ghouls, and they did what they could to spread that out. And we've talked about things like the makeup changing um, as they got better and they made different makeup. It actually is the same uh, person or persons playing a different ghoul, but it gives the sense that there's dozens of these things out here and there's just no escape from them. And whereas Night of the Living Dead uses its, or the filmmakers use these shortcomings to their advantage. Not having the resources to light a field, um, to show dozens of ghouls marching towards the house or shambling towards the house. Um, they then used shadow and pools of light, which created a whole other thing. Uh, the makers of the Killer Shrews, well, we can, now's maybe a good time to talk about that. It's directed by a gentleman named Ray Kellogg, and he, if we were looking into his background, he was actually a special effects guy. So, not on any, not for any studios or any films that really stand out in terms of their special effects. So, just the sheer volume of special effects credits that he has in such a brief amount of time says that he was just one of probably many people working on a film, and that's the credit he got. But uh, this you know we have to accept that there's these giant shrews. These are the problem, and we're given the backstory of how this cute little animal, when it's mouse size, is fine and manageable, but when you blow it up to this, I mean, it's got to eat, and it's pretty vicious. So that you could buy, but and under the right circumstances, or maybe in the hands of a director or editor like George Romero, maybe something like this shrew costume would work,
Yeah.
or puppet. I think so. There's two versions of this in the film, right? There's like the ones that the dogs wear,
Yeah,
and then there's like a hand puppet.
which is, yeah, sadly, I think the film is often berated because of the dog in costume aspect of it.
Yeah,
But one thing I found, and particularly in this, watching it this with the new Blu-ray, the shrew puppets are actually pretty cool. They're pretty
right.
effective when they're poking through holes, or when they show up. They actually work. Most of the shots with the dogs are kind of the wider shots where they needed them actually running around. And as you pointed out, it's amazing they got four dogs that were willing to, wear these get-ups and run around and chase people as needed for the film.
So my view of this is that I mean, that's a real easy thing to like poke fun at, and somewhat to the film's credit, they're giving you a lot of views of the monsters,
Yeah,
um, of what their stated monster is. They're not hiding it too much. But I think this film would have benefited from a little bit more clever presentation. The shots like this of the eyeball, kind of like that dead, almost like shark's eye, just looking through and knowing that it's like sizing up. How am I going to get in there? And stuff like that could have worked if it was kept to that, and we weren't shown. I think this we're shown like pretty early on, so you're being shown a really good glimpse of it, um, but in a setting that, as we said, they did some pretty good shots with lighting. This is the one that they kill in the cellar early on, and
to me, that when I saw that image, I thought, wow, that reminds me of the corpse on the stairs in Night of the Living Dead. Just particularly like the shot from the trailer, kind of the
there's yeah
lighting was.
there's even a closer, I know exactly there's even a closer shot when they're discussing that these things are actually poisonous. They had to throw that in as well.
Yeah,
So it's like they uh, could not really work with just the premise of big animals that are out to eat you, and they'll stop at nothing. And you know uh, they had to throw in, well, if you get a little nick in your
yeah.
leg,
Should they
from one
whip
of
your
these things,
trousers?
yeah, you're going to die of poison. And that's exactly what happens to our buddy Mario there, who's just the helpful caretaker of the this cabin or this house, where research is being done. You get the sense that he's so loyal that aliens could land and want to take everybody in for experimentation, and Mario would still want to make sure that the drinks are flowing, and the coffee's on the stove, and things are being taken care of outside. So and this is how he ends up paying for it. Um, you had mentioned, John, an interesting thing about, well, we were talking about the two, uh, again, this whole idea of like working with what you have, and this the idea of the um, you have to show these things killing people. And so one way that they do it when you have the full dog costume is, um, I believe this is Jerry, right? This is when
Yes,
Jerry
this is
dies.
Gary getting his just desserts.
So and Rook has an outside death as well, and it's a similar setup. What they would have them do is the person would either be up a tree or they'd be fleeing from the shrews, and in this case, they fall behind a trunk, a fallen tree trunk, and so they're out of view, and now the dogs can come running, and
They keep their
basically,
legs up in the air.
and then they can flail about so that the actor can flail about, knowing that you can see their legs and so forth, and they can overdub the ripping sounds and the shrews. They kind of have like a hiss, like a strange kind of like hiss, and dub in like the screaming and so forth. So um, that's just falls a little bit out of your view, and then they can you know let your imagination fill in the rest. And they couldn't quite do that with stuff in close quarters, so that's why you have the poison aspect come in. And if you just get a nick, they runs by you and breaks the skin on your leg, or the cloth of the fabric of your pant leg, and you get a nick, you're going to die from the poisoning. And that's what happens to Mario here. And as you were saying, it's much better handled the way they do that, because that is really tough to do with a dog on cue on a movie set. Where the that outside thing, you can see that it's possible for the dogs to have some fun there. And who knows what they were, if they were luring them in with some food, or the actors made friends with them, and were enticing them to follow. If that's even the lead actor, it could be the dog trainer.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of ways to do this. It's a lot harder to do a specific kill like this one. And our buddy Gordon McClendon, if I can find a shot of him, he has a similar death um, inside the house. And what's really do we have a shot of that anywhere? Um, what's really great about his death is he assures everybody that he's doing just fine. The shrew didn't get him, and then he proceeds to type everything his body is going through as he's dying. So
Up to the
he's a
point of death.
scientist till the end. Yeah. Uh, so Mr. McClendon there, as a on the one hand, he was a real estate power broker, and I read that he worked for Columbia Pictures at some point, and had a big stake in Columbia Pictures. Had to be much later on, after the Killer Shrews. But he was basically a money guy and had interests in real estate, uh, radio stations. Was somewhat of a maverick in the radio business. Uh, it was not beneath him as a thespian to just really chew the scenery and
Oh
give
yeah.
himself like a pretty crazy role like that. So
What
he is one of the more standout characters.
what's interesting to me is, and I didn't realize this at the time, but now I almost think of him like a would-be William Castle,
Right,
because
right.
my first exposure to the Killer Shrews, that I recall, I probably saw it as a kid on the creature features. But what I recall seeing was there was a videotape called Zachary Horrible Horror, which was basically a compilation tape of Zachary footage and clips from movies. That's how I found out about Spider Baby. But they had a promo for Killer Shrews, which was Gordon McClendon as Dr. Radford Baines, basically talking to the audience about shrews and Killer Shrews as kind of as this setup, explaining, how the shrews were these little tiny animals that were ferocious, and kind of the payoff to that is like, and then the only thing is the giant killer shrews. And so I remember seeing that and thinking, wow, I want to go back and watch this movie again. And of course, they showed some of the great scenes of the shrews breaking through the wall, and all the kind of money shots. Um, but at the time, I had no idea of what his kind of role is as this executive producer on this. And so it's fascinating now to be aware of that. That he was involved in kind of the whole ballyhoo showmanship, even in the promotion of it. And I went looking online for that trailer, and I haven't found it anywhere other than in that Zachary compilation. But it's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, I mean, it would be hard to imagine like um, William Castle or Roger Corman or any of those guys at the same level stepping into a role like this,
Actually
like he does
performing,
in this
yeah.
film. Um, William Castle would announce, would introduce his films, at the beginning, in kind of like a fun and thematic way,
Yeah,
whether it was like walking out of like the fog on a moor or something like that, an English moor, or whatever was happening in the film, he would kind of like play along and he would reference his previous films by calling his audience like my homicidal friends or things like that. So it was all like in good fun.
yeah,
But he to step into one of these roles as like you know, and carry a serious part like McClendon does in this film is pretty amazing.
yeah.
I see just I can't see these comments on Facebook because you everybody just comes up as or no, sorry, not on Facebook, on StreamYard because I just everybody just comes up as Facebook user, but I see Kevin and Greg and Will and Larry, everybody, said, "Hey, I'm here." So, hey, hey guys, and if you have any questions, please ask. But then, so the next thing so we've established here that um, we have our cast of characters, our 7 people, just like Night of the Living Dead, and they do set up a really good mood. But the science and the back science, the backstory, and how we get there, and then how some of these things are portrayed and used, it's just not up to the standard that Night of the Living Dead sets. So this is not like a film that people would talk about into the into the far future and argue about well this character should have done this like you have with Night of the Living Dead because it is so impactful and it does bring the audience along, and even after all these years it still has like relevance. But before Night of the Living Dead, this was kind of the formula.
Yep.
Um, you always had a love interest, you always had scientists or some authority figure. And in the case of, where the hero is introduced as the everyman, as Thorne is, James Best's character, And he treats his subordinate, his first mate, an African American man who's you know, kind of there as a bit of comic relief, but you get the sense that there's great respect there. He
Yeah.
doesn't really treat the guy poorly. It's just a very good, heroic model without him being like a Clint Eastwood or somebody along those lines. Well, Clint Eastwood was far off into the future. Who would be a good? Who would be another? Somebody from that era. That's a little bit more. The big heroic man. Not so much like a John Wayne, but somebody like of that larger than life persona. James Best's Thorne doesn't really come across that way. He comes across as like an ordinary guy. I think he even says that at certain points. I'm not up on a lot of things, but he knows like something is wrong, and he can piece it together. So he's nobody's fool, and he doesn't treat those who work for him or those who are beneath him um, socially. He doesn't treat them differently or with any kind of like snootiness, whereas you kind of get the sense that Jerry treats everybody that way in this film.
Yeah.
So the villains and the heroes are more clear cut than something like Night of the Living Dead. But again, this was the formula at the time, so you'll see this over and over again in films that we discuss, or that led to Night of the Living Dead, and or even films that we don't discuss. A lot of times, this is what was happening. So, a big part of the similarity with Night of the Living Dead has been the music in the Killer Shrews, and it's the same, yet it's different. And so, what do we mean by that? It's kind of a bit of a strange situation. And what it comes down to is this. The music supervisor is a gentleman named Harry Bluestone. You see the editor, music editor, Gil Marchand. But the bigger point here is you see music composed by Harry Bluestone and Emil Cadkin. Bluestone and Cadkin were part of the Capitol Haiku entourage of composers. Their stuff was in the earliest version of the library, probably about maybe 10 to a dozen different reels. At least 4 or 5 in the D series, the dramatic series, which is where Night of the Living Dead pulls the majority of its music from. In looking back at those reels, especially the one George, I believe Carl Hardman and thus George only had one of the LP discs that had cues from Bluestone and Cadkin. And looking at that disc, the label basically gives us the catalog code, gives us the year that the disc was produced, which is 1956. By 1957, that reel had been replaced, or that disc. They called them in Capitol Haiku speak. They called them reels, and reels would be a collection of similar sounding cues from one particular composer or composer duo, as you see here with Bluestone and Cadkin. And those reels were actually called CB reels. That was the catalog code. C for Cadkin and B for Bluestone. The next year, 1957, that reel had already been replaced. Somehow Carl Hardman still had it from 1956. It maybe was sent to him in error, or maybe he was at the forefront of Capitol Haiku and getting this material right as soon as he saw it was available, and he was asking for requesting the discs be sent to him. But in any case, he got one of those reels. by the time Night of the Living Dead was made, Harry Bluestone and Emil Katkin their material was long gone from the library, but somehow Carl still had that disc, and that's how some of the music ended up on Night of the Living Dead. In terms of the Killer Shrews, by the time this movie was made, they were already out of the Capitol High Q library. Their material had already been pulled out of it for whatever reason. So here you can see Harry Bluestone's kind of acting as his own agent. He's hired as music supervisor, and he's bringing in all his old material, or all the material that he has on hand. I would assume 1959, this material would have only been about, if it was first on Capitol High Q, maybe it was about 5 years old. But he was basically acting on his own, and that's the correlation of why the same material ended up. Now, it's not actually the same exact cues. It's the way Katkin and Bluestone recorded stuff is they would record the same themes at different speeds so that it could work differently. George happened to use everything from one particular reel, and the cue that's most talked about. I mean, first of all, it all sounds very Night of the Living Dead-ish because it's the style. It's kind of like this small orchestra, heavy brass, heavy strings, very dramatic. In fact, in the reel that George used, the disc that George used, is all of the cues are called heavy dramatic. So you know exactly what you're getting, and that batch of music ended up in George's hands, and he said, "Great, I like all of this," and he uses a lot of it from the truck escape to the end of the film. And the reason this scene where there's a fist fight, and it mirrors pretty much what happens in Night of the Living Dead. The hero is left outside, and the
By the cow.
scoundrel won't let him in, but he climbs over the fence and gets him, and a fight ensues, and of course that's Jerry, the Killer Shrews, Mr. Cooper, for better lack of a better description. And they have a fist fight, which Thorne, James Best, handily wins. And then when Jerry is knocked out, Thorne is actually going to throw him over the side of the fence and feed him to those things.
Yeah.
And the music that's playing is it's the same theme that happens in Night of the Living Dead, when from the truck catching on fire, the truck exploding. It's the cue that's used in Night of the Living Dead is slower, and it's much longer. And George even repeats a portion of it to make it fill the scene out. But it plays from when the truck catches on fire to Ben knocking out Harry and shouting at him, "I ought to drag you outside and feed you those things." And that's when the final big chord, big important chord plays. And this scene is much briefer. It's a much briefer use of the music, and it's also a very fast version. And it's not the same cue. It's just another version of the cue that was recorded fast for this particular thing. Does it work as well? It really doesn't, because it is so fast. It's taking a very obvious sounding and very kind of like heavy-handed theme, very very over the top dramatic theme, and it's just speeding it so fast that all of the pieces are hitting you a lot quicker. So it's another example of where filmmakers having access to the same material or very similar material doesn't quite give you the same outcome, right? Doesn't give you the same feeling. I mean, what were some of the points you were making about how music is used in this film? Keeping in mind it's very similar, if not almost exactly like music that's used in Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I think what struck me, other than this one scene, which again, because of the similarity in terms of what is happening on screen, the character getting locked out and getting inside and fighting, and the fact that the theme was kind of the same theme, that's fascinating to see and kind of compare. Almost everywhere else in the film where you would think, oh, this is where you'd have suspenseful music. They're about to go down into the cellar where they know this killer shrew is at, and the music is almost comedic. It's just eh, there's no finesse, there's no artistry in terms of the application of the music to the picture. And unlike George, where we know there were instances where he basically cut, the film to match existing music cues. Here, it's very clear that this, the music was applied to whatever was there in terms of film. There was no adjustment of the film to fit the music, and not
And there was no inclination to adjust the film to fit the music. Like
yes,
when they came across something that maybe was better, they would be, "Oh wow, we could move this over here, and this makes a completely different." No, there was like none of that. It's like
yeah,
it seems to be like this is what we got. Paste this on it, make it fit, and go with it.
yeah,
It's not quite of the level of something like Teenagers from Outer Space, which is always my go-to example of just how not to use library music, or just using library music in the most obvious, ridiculous way. That like we need something fast and kind of upbeat here, and they've got that, and then it's like we need something comical here. There's that. Oh, we need something spooky here, and just heavy-handedly pasting this music where a you're not really listening to the nuance that's there, and there may be another way to do it. And George was just very in tune with that. So here's just another area where, these where there's just such a departure from how I mean, generally this was the way these films were made. We're
yeah,
talking about the formulas and how they hit all the same beats, and this is how it was done. And George and company just kind of broke that. They it's not when you compare the reason to compare these things is to not just see the influences, but to see those big contrasts, so we can see the launching point that Night of the Living Dead took from something like the Killer Shrews, or taking these various influences from things like the Killer Shrews, Invisible Invaders, I Am Legend, or The Last Man on Earth is what the Vincent Price film was called,
yeah,
and kind of distilling it in its best parts into something new, and now giving the audience what they don't exactly expect.
yeah.
So that's the music uh, kind of comparison, and they were using the same music, but one film just does it with so much more finesse. We all remember Capital High Q because of Night of the Living Dead, not because of the Killer Shrews.
Yes.
And nobody's remembering, Harry Bluestone and Emil Catkin, other than that some of their music cues ended up in Night of the Living Dead,
Yeah.
and in various different ways that weren't exactly the intended use of them. So, um, going from there,
I want to talk a bit about one of the kind of budgetary things that separates Night of the Living Dead from Killer Shrews is this setting, this house, and it is so clearly done on a soundstage. Um, and it really it's one of those things where that departure makes you appreciate Night of the Living Dead, um, and the fact that the geography of the house, the farmhouse, and where things are, all kind of make sense. The hallways they go down, the structure of this house, where these scientists are doing work. Um, it 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 doesn't live and breathe the way the farmhouse does in Night of the Living Dead. You see at different times the shrews are kind of breaking through the walls, literally, but you don't really have a context of, well, how are they outside doing this? Because the interiors, that interior set, was clearly built for just the purpose of, okay, we need this main room, where they're all going to be in, and the shrews need to be able to poke their heads in little holes in the wall. um, but it's odd, and that the painting on the wall, that kind of pattern is just odd.
And it just goes through the entire house.
Yes.
There's not a whole lot of so I think something like this and um, something like this, this is your typical, take this is the dead shrew. I think that
That's the one that got
Thorn, the one that gets McClendon, or what's his name, Doctor
uh, Raddick, what's his Radford Baines.
Rafford Baines. So, um, and then it gets shot. This is one of the few thing. It has the contrast. Um, this creature on the floor of what looks like an ordinary house, and the same, with this. You're just in like an ordinary living room, and these things are starting to like um, burrow right through the walls. Um, anything to get at the meal that's inside. So, and you can see to the left there, Jerry is, you know, he's not
Behind the
leaving
bar.
the bar where all the mixed drinks were made and the
Although
martinis and everything.
after
So,
they after this scene, he basically shoves that bar in front of that hole, and all the
right.
bottles get toppled. So
And then he also takes the desk that's in the foreground where um,
yeah,
McClendon was typing out his symptoms as he passes away in real time. He pushes that in front of it, so it's the most we see coming out of Jerry. But uh, this kind of like contrast of like the ordinary setting and the monster trying to get in is, the movie has that. But again, they don't really go far enough with it. They don't board up the windows. You can see the windows there have like shutters on the other side, and they just kind of accept that that's going to be enough to hold them out. But in the meantime, it's stated early on that well, these things will just burrow right through the clay walls. So it's like, so why even bother coming up with a solution? And you know there had to be, again, you're talking about scientists. They know what the score is. They know that this is potentially going to happen, and yet nobody. They're trying to solve, overpopulation and world hunger, and nobody thinks about how they're going to potentially, kill these things off. Fire is never discussed. Maybe. Uh, they're human beings. They could human beings can lie and cheat and create diversions and do all kinds of other things, they're against animals that just have one operative, or over, one directive, which is to eat, kill whatever is near you. So, and eat it. So, none of that brain power is put to any kind of use. They just kind of accept we have to we have to make it through the night, but nobody really thinks of a way to like do it.
yeah.
And there's the difference with also with Night of the Living Dead. You get the sense that this movie was planned out. This is what's going to happen, and it has the eventual outcome is what you would expect. given the characters that are in there, who the hero is and who the beautiful woman is, and so forth.
Who's going to make it?
Yeah, and who's absolutely expendable. The guy who who looks like he possibly graduated from the Little Rascals. He's the first to go. So um, uh, it seems like they had they knew the beginning and the end, and how they got there really wasn't thought about. And Night of the Living Dead is kind of the inverse of that. It's like making sure when we get to the end that you've exhausted all logical ways of doing things. We've talked about before. Nobody ever decides in Night of the Living Dead, hey, we could actually just go outside armed with torches and probably burn the crap out of everything. And and once we get everything burned and incapacitated that way, um, then we have a moment to breathe and we can figure out what we're going to do from there. Especially when it's determined, at first everybody's afraid and it's uncertain what's going on, and there's only two of them, and then there's more people, but now more people is becoming a bit of a liability because not everybody wants to work together.
Yep.
Um, but at some point, somebody could have said, "Well, the gun isn't effective, but let's keep that as a backup. Let's use fire, and fire doesn't need to be reloaded, and
Yeah.
fire will just keep burning upon itself and just creating more fire as it hits more flammable things." But the that's never explored because that's the conceit of the film. The film is that we have to get to the end, and so George and crew and the actors and the way everything is portrayed is that there was no other possibility other than the way it turns out.
Yeah.
And in this film, the Killer Shrews, you kind of have the opposite. There was all this brain power that should have, that created the problem in the first place, that knows exactly what's going on, and they don't figure out a way to, um, to deal with the problem other than, at least in some kind of clever way. Um, until the very end, which is I guess it's the idea of our main guy Thorn, right? Is this
Well,
is the little outside area, and
Jerry says at one point it would take a tank to get through that
right.
that crowd of shrews.
So that that's also typical formula. A character makes an offhand comment and the light bulb goes on somewhere
Yeah,
else, and somebody says, "Oh wow, we could do it."
we
So
could kill a
what
tank.
the ingenious method is that they weld these tanks together. This is that fenced in area outside the house, which
Has the similar painting to the inside of the house.
yeah, it has almost the same, even though it doesn't have it here, because this is actually outside a house.
Yes.
But it's got this fenced in area, which I guess they're using for, um, to do industrial kind of work that you can't do outside. Like if they have to weld something to, there's a whole welding setup right there. So they're able to get these uh, kind of elongated, drums, metal drums. It's kind of like the long version of like a 55-gallon drum,
Yeah, it's
and they
almost like
weld several of them together.
somebody said, "Could we use 55-gallon drums?" And they said, "There's no way a character could get underneath a 55-gallon drum and walk."
And also be also be protected in some way.
Yeah.
So yeah, they basically have to do a duck walk with four of these things welded together. Jerry doesn't make it, so it's three of them, and basically carrying the fourth load. and there's the they kind of save the clever um, the clever way to get out of their situation to the end. But nobody thinks of doing anything like that through the entirety of the rest of the film, even when they know what the stakes are. So
One
um,
one of the other interesting things is there are plenty of guns.
yeah,
Multiple pistols, shotguns. There are guns right and left, people getting pointed at. Um, and these things can be shot and killed, and yet
right,
it's not the totemistic thing that the gun represents in Night of the Living Dead, where it's like, oh yeah, he who has the gun is the king, and they fight over that. They're offhand kind of bickering about the guns, but other than the notion of, well, yeah, maybe they don't have unlimited ammunition, but still, it's like you've got guns. It's like, how are you not dealing with this problem more effectively?
well, the conceit is that um, if left if the situation is left on its own, it's basically going to burn itself out
Yeah,
because the shrews are going to run out of food, and then
eat
they're
each
going to
other.
turn on each other, and then they're going to basically kill each other until there's only one left, and then that one's going to starve to death. So they're basically trying to play the long game, but they're really relying on a lot. You could figure, even if you're, why don't you save that as you're out? And if you could, you could make it that long, the problem's going to take care of itself. But at the same time, like, why don't you do something to hurry it up a little bit? You know what I mean? Make it
And
a little bit
meanwhile,
tougher.
they continue the experiments of the shrews. So you're like, yeah,
Right. They're still doing
everyone's
that.
getting dead.
So the eventual outcome is what you can imagine, which is the hero Thorn and Anne survive. Jerry doesn't make it. He gets swarmed by the dogs. Um, and the dogs playing shrews, and the doctor, the main professor, also makes it. And so in that way, unlike some of the Universal films, starting with Frankenstein, but definitely going through the Jack Arnold films like Incredible Shrinking Man or Tarantula or some of the other Monster on Campus, the science is not considered in a very or painted in a very good light in those films, and usually the scientists get theirs, for having dared, upset things.
Yeah,
Um, Even like to the point that um, again, the doctors working in secrecy and confidentiality or doing their business in some remote location, and they're the ones who actually get it in the end. Uh, the good scientists, the like in something like Tarantula, the bad scientists all die like horrible, disfigured deaths, from acromegaly. And if that isn't enough, a giant spider comes in and kills the last one, who's responsible for the whole. It's really just saying, you're, uh, you know, these scientists are just ruining everything. They're ruining the American way. And we have this great country doctor over here who solves the whole thing. And he's the one that, survives. And, again, with the beautiful woman. So,
yeah.
um, in these films, science is not, you know, is not treated very well. And the scientists usually get killed. So it's amazing that the Dr. Craig actually sees it to the end of this film and gives the summation. In 24 hours there'll be one shrew left and that will starve to death, and that's the end of the problem that I've created.
Yeah,
So,
it's almost like that they had to have him stick around to basically to deliver that little speech at the end, because
right,
otherwise, James Best isn't going to know what's going on. He's happy he's made it to the boat. He's got his new girlfriend with him, so
but she's a zoologist, so she's going to know this better than anybody else, and that's why she's along for the experiments as well. um, None of that makes like a whole lot of sense. but that's their story, and they stuck to it. So
Yeah. And again, despite its issues, of which it has several, I do think it makes for an entertaining viewing. I think that there are aspects, some of the things we talked about, and these similarities and differences from Night that make it play kind of differently to a Night of the Living Dead fan. Um, but I think it's a better film than it's often been given credit
oh,
for.
absolutely. It's not the absolute, ridiculous worst, thing ever made that it's often tagged with.
Yeah,
As we could see from this new version, it's very well shot. Um, you really can't complain about the actors. I mean, they're doing what you made the comment. They're actors.
yeah,
They come across as actors. You really get the sense of this as and this would more or less be the director or the lack of time, but there's a lot more divergence between the outside outdoor location stuff and the on the set stuff, and
yeah,
the on the set um, filmed scenes come across more of like a stage play than they do a feature film,
yeah,
and they just don't have all the little nuances that George put in
yeah,
his film, or was known for putting in his films. We've talked about things like um, in Night of the Living Dead. There's an ample amount of time to just the main character sitting there smoking a cigarette, seeing how exhausted he is, and that leads to him looking through the closet and finding certain items, and George just really takes his time with all that, with something that people would think normally is boring, but George has his way of doing it. He sees it a certain way, and you just don't get that kind of unique artist's view with this film.
yeah,
It's very they have a lot of good pieces there, but they just don't really set it up and utilize it past the obvious,
yeah,
which is put all your characters in a room, have them say their lines. There's got to be tension between these characters. There's got to be some emotion and yelling, and they hit all those points. But at the end of the day, they don't do a whole lot with it. And there's much bigger films that have the same problem. So
sure.
have
Yeah,
the same problems.
and I think, as you said, there are a lot of ingredients in this film to have made a better film.
Yes.
In terms of if they had taken advantage of some of um, the opportunities to set up things a little more suspensefully, and not just have everything kind of um, play out uh, in a more formulaic fashion. Uh,
Right.
but despite that, and like you said, it's not like it's a poorly shot, or a poorly made film technically, but it makes you appreciate the skills that George had as just a director, but as an editor, as someone who was able to kind of apply music to the film, all those
Right.
things that he had, those intangible skills. Um, you appreciate more and more that, oh, that wasn't just somebody doing routine things. That was somebody really applying a vision to what they were doing.
So, do we have any questions from anybody here? Kind of see all the
Has
same.
everybody run out to get their copies of the Blu-rays?
Yeah, right now it's rising in the Amazon ranks because we've been talking about it. They're all just like right there, and you know, let me see something here. We didn't touch upon the. It doesn't quite fit, but you get the idea. It's not quite fitting the frame, but this is one of the. Um, I guess this would be like the half sheet. I think
Yeah,
the one sheet is like very similar, but of course, oriented from top to bottom. Much much more vertical than this one is horizontal. But
Ingrid getting top billing there over James Best even.
yeah, yeah. I don't know what the deal was with that, but
Well, they had to explain the shoe, right?
yeah.
It's like, is that James Best's pump? I don't think so.
Yeah, ironically, there's one woman in the film and she doesn't die. So, but again, it's a
Oh,
great, just a really good, uh, the idea that these things eat everything, so all that's left is one shoe. So it's a pretty cool tagline. And again, it could have this movie could have easily been called Night of the Killer Shrews, and it would have fit the theme of the film even better. And I guess at that point there really weren't any night of
when was
exploitation type.
Night of the Blood Beast? That's I'm trying to think of.
Night of the Blood Beast. That's a. But was that was the title?
It was
I think that's
1958.
1950s.
Yeah, 58.
I seem to remember that having a different title, but that's a weird one because um, there I don't know if Night of the Blood Beast. I don't know if you could really even call it the Blood Beast, right? It's an alien. It's like a weird alien thing.
Yeah.
Uh, so
Well,
call it.
don't let the story get in the way of a good title.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. Yeah, 58. Well, I guess they figured, just to economize, you know, the killer shrews. That's all anybody needs to know about. And
Yeah. Because think about it. What was the previous one? It's the giant Gila monster. So it's like,
right,
what is it? It's a Gila monster, but it's not just. It's a giant, and it's like it's not just a shrew. It's a killer shrew.
right,
Now they didn't call the movie the Giant Killer Shrews, but they do
right.
refer to them that
But
way.
they are giant.
Yeah. I think if they had called them giant and they weren't the size of the hot rods, then people would have been disappointed after, the
Yeah,
movie.
I think that's the other deal with giant Gila monster. There's like some other um, exploitation aspects that McClendon probably was the one putting in there, including hot rods, similar to the Blob, but the Blob was in the future, right? Was the Blob made the same year, or was it a year after? Was that 60?
58. No, so the Blob was
Oh,
50.
so it was before. So, and there again, there's a another independent. It doesn't seem independent because again, it's Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
But uh, another independent Pennsylvania film, just the other side of Pennsylvania. Not the Pittsburgh side, the closer to Philadelphia
Other
side.
side.
But that whole thing of putting um, teenagers in, putting cars in.
The
Gila Monster
music, the
actually has
rock and
some,
roll.
yeah, it actually has some rock and roll numbers, right? Has a few, like the main character performs a couple songs. Um, Maybe that's where he got the idea, with something like the Blob. I never actually put those two together, but um, it seems like, with that film, he's putting McClendon wanted certain exploitation aspects to be in there for the intended audience, and Killer Shrews is just another. It's on another tangent altogether.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting because I hadn't really thought about it, but it is absent so many of the check boxes, right? It's like
yeah,
there's not the teenagers, there's not the music, there's not the car culture. It's like all those things that you would think, you could understand why he used them with Gila Monster, but it's like what were you thinking, Killer Shrews? You put them on this island with these kind of strange
yeah. I mean, it's a
characters.
Killer Shrews is that that whole siege, that siege vibe,
Yeah,
where you're trapped. The Gila Monster does the other, like does the opposite, which was even as a kid, I always used to question like certain movies. It's like, okay, well, they're in town and there's this giant something, whether it's like giant spider, Earth
And
versus
praying
the spider,
mantis.
or yeah. So why don't you just leave? Why are you staying there? And I think some characters in something like well, the conceit with those films, so something like Tarantula does it the best. They basically keep it hidden, not necessarily hidden, but this giant thing that's this problem that's getting bigger and bigger keeps evading. It's using the openness of the desert to like, you know, evade
Yeah,
the authorities until once everybody finds out about it, it's too late. So I think Gila Monster kind of does that same thing. The Blob certainly does that.
yeah,
In one night, this thing gets loose, and for whatever reason, and it's the whole thing of the teenagers, well, very old teenagers, 28 or 9-year-old Steve McQueen as a teenager, but basically tried to convince the local cops that this thing is out there and it's a problem and it's going to consume everybody, and just um, it's to the adversary's advantage that nobody's taking it seriously or even
yeah,
understands that
yeah,
it's there. So that's how those things operate. Something where you've isolated your characters and put them in the situation where it's hard for them to get out of it. Then you could throw it all out in the open, because that's the whole point, is that nobody can get out. So it's
yeah,
interesting how they had those two different kind of thematic ways of doing a science fiction horror exploitation film.
yeah, yeah. It wasn't. It certainly is not cookie cutter between the two. So
Yeah, very interesting. So, any more questions from anybody? I can't quite see if anybody's writing anything or any questions at all.
I don't see any other questions. But hopefully, Lawrence, you won't be dissuaded from checking out the Killer Shrews. It does have some value to be appreciated.
And you get this great, let me see if I can actually get it to be on screen. Maybe if I hold it like that. So you get this great, double feature, and it's good quality. And George Romero fans appreciate, and Night of the Living Dead fans appreciate restored, good quality
Yep,
Blu-ray releases. There's something to be said with that. And
absolutely.
did somebody? I guess not. It's hard for me to tell because I only see the um,
The
the
filter.
comment screen here, and it's kind of weird. So it's hard for me to follow on Facebook. But anyway, we did it in about 90 minutes. So hooray for us.
A record.
So that's not too much for people to take, and we would like to continue doing this kind of briefer, um, encapsulated version of Night Talk, where we're just not getting so far into the weeds nobody can follow what we're saying anymore.
Yeah, doing our Killer Shrew science. We'll refer to that as.
But so we are going to continue on this vein of the predecessors to Night and what those similarities are, but why there's a big divergence. We're going to cover other films in the future, and one film per discussion at a time. So there's a lot for people to digest. Again, we picked the Killer Shrews just came up because of this great new Blu-ray release, which is affordable and good quality, and just enables you to see the film in a more decent light. But we're talking about next week, same time. We'd like to come back again, and what do we want to talk about, John?
Well, for those that missed our presentation at the Living Dead weekend, We want to do a revisit of our Unseen Night presentation, sharing photographs that are going into um, the forthcoming book on Night of the Living Dead, including a lot of really cool images that most of you will have never seen before. And we think doing it this way will be a little bit nicer quality presentation for those who did sit through the kind of Facebook Live via Daz's iPhone, or who missed it. But I have some thoughts, and I actually want to mix it up a bit. So even if people saw the original presentation, I think we'll have a few new surprises in there for them as well.
Yeah, we'll add a few more in there, and as John's saying, it'll just be a lot cleaner, and we can talk a little bit more about, having done it once, we can get we can get some other thoughts in or some other points in about some of those photographs that we maybe had to rush through.
And I imagine
And,
there will probably be more questions about those as well too.
yeah, and then in this format, we can also answer people's questions. So tune in next week, same time, and we will be bringing you the Unseen Night, and then we will continue from there. A lot of cool stuff happening in Night of the Living Dead, the Night of the Living Dead world, as well as the Romero universe period. As people saw, the Waxwork record Dawn of the Dead soundtrack release is coming out, and this is the library music, which we've spent a lot of time talking about for Night of the Living Dead, but also if you've been at the Living Dead weekend before, for other films, including Dawn of the Dead, Mike Gornick and myself and Chris Stavrakis and one time John Vulo as well have had many discussions and then Q&As about the music used in Dawn of the Dead, which is even more expensive than what was done in Night of the Living Dead. So I'm sure at some point John Vulo and I will be doing something with that now that release is coming out to a even bigger audience. So we'll be doing our Dawn version of Night Talk. I guess Dawn Talk. I'm gonna have to cut a new promo for that. So
excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to these because there are a lot of cool films that fall into this category of kind of precursors to Night. But I'm also looking forward to doing another talk on the photos because, again, working on the book and seeing these things is pretty energizing, and so sharing that with people is going to be fun.
And I hope we find. I'm not sure of it offhand, but I hope we find some more good Blu-ray releases like this one.
Yeah,
that sparked this one.
That's a high bar.
Yeah, I don't know if too many other of the films that I have in mind for as being predecessors of Night of the Living Dead have as good releases as this particular one does.
Yeah, there are a number that I'm thinking of that would fit that have decent Blu-ray releases, but there are a few that I think probably only exist in not necessarily bad, but only in standard def kind of DVD releases.
Yeah, right. So okay, well, until the next time, we'll
thanks everybody for watching.
Everybody soon, and have a great holiday, and we'll see you all soon.